Hello everyone and welcome to the European Social Union Debate, a podcast series from Eurovisions discussing the way ahead for the establishment of a European Social Union with policy experts and politicians. This podcast series is a spin-off of an editorial project published on the Eurovisions website, where top scholars from European universities discuss the potentialities of a European Social Union for Europe. My name is Alexander Damiano Ricci and I'm your host. Joining today's 7th episode and discussion on the establishment of a European Social Union, Maxime Cerutti, who is Director of Business Europe's Social Affairs Department. Mr. Cerutti coordinates Business Europe's engagement as a social partner in the context of the European Social Dialogue. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Cerutti.
With pleasure, I'm pleased to be with you.
Mr. Cerutti, in the run-up to the European elections, Eurovisions is advocating for the establishment of a fully-fledged European Social Union that is a stronger institutional system for the social protection of workers and citizens, based upon tighter coordination between member states. And I would really love to know from you what your vision is about the importance of social Europe nowadays and the future development of a more social Europe.
It's an important question, of course. And the first thing I want to say is that Europe is one of the best places to live and work in the world. So I think we should not start from scratch and consider that Europe is not going well in terms of social, because of course, when we speak about Europe, one part of it is what relates to the European Union, but the European Union should be looked at together with what is being done on the national level and at the respective levels where social partners engage and where the governments make decisions for all that has to do with people, that is work, that is of course education, that is also the way in which they can have access to some social benefits. And the first thing I want to say is that in this respect, Europe really stands out in the world as one of the best places to live and work, because we see as our continent a place where we work as social market economies, where we invest in social well-being of people. And when you look at the figures and the comparisons globally between European countries, Europe as a region of the world and the world, it's quite clear that the social protection spending is quite high in Europe. And in fact, it is really among the highest in the world. And also all that is organized in terms of working conditions and living conditions in the member states is really at the top of the global comparison. So I think we should be proud of what we have achieved. And having in mind that social policy outcomes to a large extent derive from the economic climate and the economic policy, and that the two should really go hand in hand, it's important that we, for the future, consider what will be the best way in improving the social outcomes. And this is, in our view, with successful enterprises, European enterprises in the world, by being able to develop products and services that are going to find clients, that are going to be adding value in order to generate some income, and that the income then can be redistributed in our society. But in order to achieve that, a very important point is to make sure people work and to make sure that the work of people is productive, because this is a basis for ensuring some improving labor conditions in Europe.
I have to play a bit the devil's advocate, so to speak. One of the key premises of the European Social Union debate, nevertheless, is that if you want the European Union is somehow unbalanced in the sense that it focuses more on economic and monetary integration and less on social integration, if you want. Would you agree with this vision?
I believe that the social objectives of the European Union are very clear. This is clear in the treaty, and this is also clear in the existing European social policy. There are a quite high number of directives that exist at European level that fix some minimum requirements that need to be respected across Europe. There are, of course, important policy coordination vehicles in Europe for what it comes to employment policy, but also social protection policy. There is the European Social Fund that provides funding to the member states, and in particular in terms of upskilling the workforce can play a quite important role. But in order to achieve a social policy, you need first to make sure that the premises are there, and the premises are to have competitive companies. And for that reason, I think we should not oppose the economy and the social outcomes. On the contrary, I think it's about finding the right convergence between the two in order to have policy making that is going to be at the same time meeting the needs of enterprises and workers and more generally people.
What are the priorities then of businesses across Europe for the development of a more social Europe, in your opinion?
I think we need to ensure that Europe wins markets in high value-added productions. and that our workforce becomes more productive. I mean, one issue relating to this is one of the key challenges for European employees nowadays in Europe. There are important labor shortages and skills mismatches across Europe. So the situation is diverse. It's not the same in all countries. But if you compare to, let's say, 5 years ago, what is clear is that unemployment was then the key issue, and that now the key issue has evolved because the recovery that has been underway over the last years has generated quite a lot of employment. So employment growth has been there. There was a reduction of unemployment as well. And nowadays, many employers do not find the people with the skills they need. So there are two different things that are behind this phenomenon. The first is the fact that in some countries, aging of populations is hitting harder than in others. And when it is combined with some economic needs that are important, it means that there may be really a quantitative problem of not having enough people. That is the case in some countries. But there is also the more structural problem that is very important across Europe, which is that our education and training provision does not match labor market needs well. And so a very important area of progress in the future is to improve education and training, that people make better choices. And that's very important because people choose to a very large extent their education and training. That's where they build the possibilities for their future career. And of course, it is an ongoing journey because we are speaking about careers when we need to make sure that we are reskilling and upskilling the people so that there are good transitions on our labor markets. But of course, we first need to activate people. And there are quite many member states where a lot more could be done to activate the inactive populations, which remain significant groups of people. And of course, in order to improve the matching, you first need to identify where are the skills needs, and social partners can play an important role in that. But it's also something that needs to be really tailored to the needs of different regions, of different economic ecosystems that are very variable across countries. And depending on where you are, I think then you can devise the solutions. But a lot depends on business and education partnerships, a stronger role of social partners, where this is part of the industrial relations practice in the training systems and in delivering the skills that enterprises need.
Following up on this answer, this is partially even linked, if you want, to the brain drain issue, right? I mean, you're mentioning that there's not always a match between the labor force and the labor market. For instance, I think this is even something which is happening in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, where the companies are looking a lot for workforce they don't have. And still, I mean, we have at the same time countries from Southern and Eastern Europe who actually raise a bit the issue of losing their workforce, their best workforce, to other countries. Do you think that this is a problem nowadays?
I think mobility is rather a solution. I think it's a good thing that we have a single market in Europe, and part of the single market is the freedom for people to move across borders. So I think this is a very valuable thing that the European Union has contributed to, and we need to really build on that. On the other hand, of course, it's clear that the situations on labor markets vary, and that means that people where there is high demand for labor in some countries may be willing to go in another country to work, which I think can be very positive for them. But at the same time, it's true that there are a number of countries, particularly in Central and Eastern European countries and in Southern Europe, where there were quite many people living, and this can create some difficulties for labor markets to function effectively. So we need to ensure that these mobility situations are contributing positively for all the countries. That means that when people move, it's good if there is a return, that there are more circular migrations within Europe. And of course, the incentives will come when the countries of origin, and here I'm speaking essentially of those countries where economic development is lower. You know, the single market is also contributing to catching up for those countries, and we see it in the figures. For that reason, I think in the future there would be more attractiveness of those countries for the people who have been mobile. So they need to do the right reforms to have the investments going on in their countries so that they become more attractive. And when there would be more convergence in Europe between countries and the economic development is going to improve in those catching up, but at the same time, for those countries that are now with higher living conditions, we are also going to further progress. I think it will be in the end a positive story for everyone. So mobility is not a problem, mobility is a solution, but we need to account for possible effects of mobility, and we need to make sure that all countries develop and become attractive.
Let's focus on the autonomous work program of the European social partners for the years first 2016-2018, to which Business Europe gave a fundamental contribution, together with other social partners, of course. And you addressed, among other matters, the issue of the involvement of social partners in the European semester and economic governance processes. Can you explain to us what the state of the art is nowadays, and most of all, if there is a need for improvement on that, and in case, in what direction this improvement needs to go?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think it's an important issue and progress is indeed needed, and it's also underway. You may know that in 2016, so in the first years of the Commission that is coming to an end now, there was a focus on a new start for social dialogue, and that was quite an encouraging step because it was about, for a good part of the document that was co-signed by the European Commission, the Council, and the employers and the trade unions, this quadripartite statement. A good part of it was about improving the involvement of social partners in the European semester, and at the same time identifying an issue that is one of the solutions to make such progress, which is to have social partners organizations across Europe, so in the member states, with enough resources and the resources needed in order to fully play their role, notably in the European semester context. So, I mean, it's the challenge and the solution at the same time. You know the European semester process, so it's a yearly process of economic and social coordination. It's around the objectives of boosting growth and jobs in Europe. There was, of course, important discussions on moving in the right direction in terms of macroeconomic imbalances, and new tools have been set in the economic dimension. But on the social affairs side, what has in the last years important has been the development of a social scoreboard. So you've got indicators that allow to compare member states, and at the same time, the Commission has reinforced its analytical work for each country. So there is a country-specific analysis at the beginning of the year, which is then followed up by the development and the adoption of country-specific recommendations. So the Commission does the preparations, but it's really the Council that plays an essential role of adopting those country-specific recommendations. And we as social partners play a role throughout the process. So Business Europe, my organization, we intervene at the European level various ways with the European institutions, essentially the Commission and the Council. But of course, in order to work, you need to have those debates and discussions between the national social partners, their governments, and also with the Commission, those people dealing with the country-specific analysis and preparing the recommendations. The next steps in the context of the European semester for us, building on the role that we have and also keeping in mind what I said about the need for social partners at national level to have their capacities reinforced in order for them to play their role in the European semester context, is really to focus on improving the performance of labor markets and social systems. You mentioned at the beginning of our interview the work program of the European Social Dialogue for 2019-2021, and that is something that is, of course, very much at the center of our activities now. This is the framework with which we cooperate with the European Trade Union Confederation as social partners, and this is involving, of course, our European organizations together with the national affiliates on both sides. So if you want to compare, I think in the first years when we worked on the European semester, the focus was on strengthening the involvement of social partners from a process point of view. And now we are getting into more content-oriented discussions between social partners, which relate to some topics that are addressed in the context of the European semester. And we've identified for the years 2019-2020, 4 topics that will be at the core of our activities. We already started with the first one, which was young people not in education or in employment or training. We also have 3 others that are going to come. One on active labor market policies, another one next year on demographic challenges, and we will also have one on childcare at the end of next year. So these are important issues for labor markets to function more effectively in future. Of course, there are important areas where we need to improve the reform implementation. Every year in Business Europe, we publish Reform Barometer, and in this Reform Barometer, we identify that there is a challenge of lack of implementation of the measures that come from the European semester, the country-specific recommendations. So around 20% of those country-specific recommendations that are implemented adequately in the states. And of course, we need to really do better than that. And the European coordination process is playing an important role in that respect. So we need to see as social partners what are the key issues for the labor markets to function better. And with this work program, I am confident that we have identified important ones and that we will be contributing through our work as social partners for better implementation of the reforms nationally in the future.
Mr. Cerutti, thank you very much for this interesting discussion on the prospects of a European Social Union and for giving us an extensive overview of the opinions of Business Europe.
With pleasure.
And that's it for today's show. You can find many other contents about ideas, discourse and policies on Social Europe on New Vision's website at www.uvisions.eu. Until next time, from my side, goodbye.